You are drifting tonight through the quiet hum of interplanetary space, where even silence seems to shimmer. Beyond the orbit of Earth, a faint, cold traveler moves through the dark, a visitor from another star. They call it 3I Atlas, and though it's just a lump of frozen gas and dust, it carries something more haunting than a mystery. It carries timing, precision, intent, the kind of alignment that makes astronomers whisper and philosophers lose sleep. Imagine this: a comet, born in another system, arriving just as NASA announces potential biosignatures in Martian rock. Not a year before, not a decade later, the very same season. The odds of that coincidence are so vanishingly small that even the most skeptical observers find themselves glancing upward a little longer each night. Because coincidences don't usually arrive with a carbon dioxide coma 8 times richer than water. They arrive as if on schedule. The air on Mars is thin, so thin it would tear your breath away. Yet this interstellar object carries exactly the kind of gas that once made the red planet warm and alive. What are the chances that a wanderer from beyond our sun would bring the very element Mars has been missing for billions of years? What are the chances it would drift close enough to deliver it? You begin to feel the question tighten behind your eyelids. Is this just chemistry or choreography? Scientists will tell you that space is chaos, but tonight it feels scripted. Each trajectory a sentence, each orbit a pause between thoughts. Maybe we are reading a story we didn't write, one that began long before Earth cooled, and somewhere within that narrative, Mars waits like a half-finished chapter, its surface remembering rivers, its sky remembering pressure, its soil remembering breath. So before you fall asleep, ask yourself this: what if 3I Atlas isn't just passing by? What if it's returning to finish something that started long ago? Leave a comment telling me what time it is and where you are listening from tonight. Then close your eyes. Picture that faint light slipping behind the sun, unseen, unstoppable. The universe is turning a page, and Mars is waiting. You wake to the thought that space doesn't need an invitation. It arrives unannounced, without a sound, and sometimes it brings gifts we don't yet know how to unwrap. 3I Atlas, officially 3I Atlas, entered our solar system like a quiet rumor, first spotted by the survey telescopes in Hawaii that spend their nights watching for rocks that might collide with us. The data came in faint and trembling, like a heartbeat too distant to measure. But within days, astronomers realized this object wasn't bound to the Sunday. It wasn't from here at all. Its orbit was hyperbolic, meaning it had come from beyond, a true interstellar visitor, moving too fast ever to return. At first, there was the usual scientific excitement. The last time humanity saw something like this was 2019, when 2I, Borisov, swept past with its icy blue tail. Before that, in 2017, came the strange cigar of 1I, Oumuamua, the first confirmed interstellar object, tumbling end over end and sparking 1,000 theories. But Atlas was different, larger, brighter, heavier. It carried the gravity of mystery, as though each photon it reflected came with a secret. Even its light curve, the way its brightness changed over time, felt unnaturally steady, too calm for a spinning chunk of ice. As the weeks passed, the object began to glow faintly green, a shade usually reserved for comets, rich in dicarbon and cyanide. Astronomers debated chemical ratios, telescope calibrations, the standard models of sublimation. But there was one number that kept rising through the noise: 8-1. 8 parts carbon dioxide for every part of water. No known comet, not from this system or any other, had ever shown a composition like that. The readings came from the James Webb Space Telescope, confirmed by the SPHIREX mission, then echoed again from ground-based observatories in Chile. The universe, it seemed, had decided to send us a dry ice comet. If you're listening closely, imagine it now, a silent body moving faster than thought, its surface jetting plumes of invisible vapor, painting delicate trails that no one can see from Earth. Somewhere out there, between Jupiter's orbit and the vast emptiness beyond, a chemical equation unfolds in real time. Carbon dioxide pouring into space like breath. Scientists will tell you it's normal. Comets vent. They burn. They boil. They scream softly into the void. Yet this one feels intentional, as though it's exhaling on cue. NASA's press releases have been calm, almost rehearsed. No evidence of artificial origin, they say. No danger to Earth. And they're right. Technically, Atlas will never come close enough to us for harm. But those who read the orbital data noticed something elegant, almost poetic. Its path will bring it within 30 million kilometers of Mars, close enough to paint the planet's thin atmosphere with a whisper of carbon gas. Not enough to change the world, perhaps, but enough to leave a signature. Enough to raise a question that refuses to fade. You might picture it now, Mars, glowing faintly under a rust-colored sky, its horizon trembling with dust, the temperature at dawn so low that sound itself seems frozen, and far above, a comet from another star passing close, its tail curving like an artist's stroke. There is something cinematic about that alignment, almost mythic. It feels like timing written in ink. Ancient watchers once named comets as omens, heaven's punctuation marks. The Chinese recorded them as broom stars, sweeping away old ages. The Babylonians saw them as divine messengers. Even the Mayans carved their appearances into stone calendars, linking them to cycles of renewal and destruction. Tonight, we echo those same instincts. We track their light with sensors instead of prayer. But the question remains the same. Why now? To the scientists, the answer is randomness, cosmic statistics, the inevitable intersection of moving bodies in an infinite sea. To the poets and dreamers, it is orchestration. Perhaps the cosmos writes in rhythm we've forgotten how to read. Perhaps every orbit, every alignment, is a syllable in an ancient sentence still unfolding. You sit with that thought as your breathing slows. The hum of your room fades, replaced by the imagined sound of solar wind. The comet glides onward, indifferent yet magnetic, carrying its frozen payload toward a world we've always called our neighbor. Somewhere, a rover hums quietly in Jezero Crater, analyzing a sample that looks suspiciously alive. Somewhere else, a telescope logs another measurement, another anomaly, and you begin to sense the invisible threads that tie them together. Chemistry, timing, coincidence, or design. It's easy to dismiss the romance of space as human projection. We see patterns because our minds crave them. But every now and then, the universe offers a coincidence, so perfect, it feels like recognition. A visitor rich in greenhouse gas approaches a planet gasping for air, a signal of life on one world, a breath from beyond on another. The story writes itself, but we're only just learning to read it. Somewhere between data and dream, 3i Atlas continues its silent journey, tracing the arc of possibility. And as it draws closer to Mars, the question deepens, like gravity itself. Because if space is random, it's the most poetic randomness imaginable. And if it isn't, then something someone may be writing in the language of orbits. And yet, even then, this is only the beginning. Imagine a clock so vast, it measures its seconds in centuries. That's the kind of precision 3i Atlas seems to obey. When scientists first plotted its path, the numbers looked ordinary until they didn't. The curve of its orbit fit too neatly, its velocity too stable, its encounter with Mars too exact to feel random. Even the date of its closest approach, October 3rd, 2025, sat like a cipher, aligning perfectly with Mars's position behind the Sun from Earth's view. The same week, NASA confirmed traces of possible ancient microbial life in Jezero crater. If space is chaos, this felt like choreography. The universe, for all its size, loves rhythm. Planets dance to equations. Moons keep time, like loyal metronomes. Yet Atlas moves with the grace of something rehearsed, as if it has known its cue for billions of years. The Atlas telescope array that discovered its small domes on volcanic slopes in Hawaii wasn't even looking for visitors from the stars. It was scanning for asteroids that might threaten Earth. And still, by some improbable alignment, it caught this interstellar traveler at the exact angle, the exact moment it entered our solar system's stage. Astronomers describe its path as hyperbolic, which is a mathematical way of saying unbound. It came too fast to be captured, too steep to settle, like a spark skipping across the surface of a pond. But when they ran simulations backward, the origin pointed somewhere near the constellation Sagittarius, the same direction the Milky Way's core glows brightest, where stars are born and die in swirls of radiation. That region is ancient, metal-poor, a cradle for long-forgotten worlds. Whatever sent this object, or whatever expelled it, did so long before humans learned to map the heavens. You could spend a lifetime studying the coincidences, and each one would only sharpen the feeling that you're missing a larger pattern. The CO2, rich chemistry, matching Mars's lost atmosphere. The alignment of its trajectory with the ecliptic plane within 5 degrees of perfect. The timing of its visibility window, overlapping exactly with a solar conjunction that hides it from all terrestrial telescopes. It's as if the universe built a magician's trick into celestial mechanics, a sleight of orbit. The moment we most need to see it is the moment it disappears. Dr. Avi Loeb from Harvard calls this the cosmic hiding act. He points out that any advanced object could use the sun's gravity as a curtain. Behind that glare, it could break, adjust its course, or even capture itself into orbit without anyone on Earth observing. It's speculation, yes, but the math allows it. Gravity is universal, so are coincidences that refuse to stay coincidences. Picture the scene from afar. Mars moving slowly along its path, a cold ember in the dark, while a pale green streak crosses behind the Sunday. Light bends, instruments blink out, and the silence becomes absolute. For several weeks, humanity is blind to the one event that might rewrite its cosmic history. That blindness feels almost deliberate, like a pause written into a song. But perhaps the greater mystery isn't the comet, it's us. We look for meaning in the margins because meaning is our survival instinct. When ancient astronomers saw comets, they saw warnings. When Renaissance scientists saw them, they saw wonder. Now, in the age of spectroscopy and data models, we see probabilities. And when those probabilities converge too tightly, we whisper conspiracy. The human brain cannot resist rhythm. It translates chaos into pattern. But what if the pattern is real this time? What if the universe isn't random, but recursive, repeating itself in cycles we're only beginning to recognize? Imagine being on Mars, standing at Jezero crater as dawn breaks. The horizon glows pale red, and above it, a faint emerald shimmer drifts by a visitor from another system, exhaling the very gas that once thickened this sky. The rover hums, its sensors blinking, unaware of poetry, unaware of prophecy. Somewhere deep in its code, data streams back to Earth, each packet a pulse in humanity's curiosity. The numbers will be clean, the language scientific, the implications anything but. You find yourself asking strange questions at night now. Why carbon dioxide? Why now? Why this trajectory that kisses the edge of habitability before vanishing into the void? Could it be that the same forces that shaped stars and molecules also shape coincidence itself? That the improbable is just another name for the inevitable? Perhaps coincidence is the universe's way of practicing subtlety. It gives us patterns just sharp enough to notice, but not enough to prove. It's how wonder survives in a rational age. We cannot stand mystery for long. We must name it, measure it, tame it. And yet, here comes a fragment of another sun, moving with precision that mocks our randomness, hinting that even chaos follows choreography. The scientists call it a comet, the poets call it an omen, and you, somewhere between both, call it familiar. Because deep down, you recognize this pattern, the rhythm of something returning, the feeling that we've seen this before, just written in another sky. And still, even then, we are only at the beginning. Some nights, the numbers themselves seem to hum. You can almost hear them, the quiet arithmetic of something vast and unbothered, unfolding far beyond the edge of comprehension. In the data streams from NASA, the figures arrive like heartbeats: eccentricity greater than 1, carbon dioxide ratio 8:1, velocity 43 kilometers per second. They look ordinary, sterile, obedient to science. But underneath, something feels alive, as though the digits themselves are breathing. Every measurement of 3i Atlas carries a frequency, a pulse that scientists cannot quite explain. The deeper they look, the more the mathematics begins to feel like language. Spectroscopic readings from the James Webb Space Telescope show peaks and troughs that shimmer like a code, thin lines of light, where carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and cyanide whisper their presence. These aren't exotic substances, but the way they're arranged defies the textbook expectations of a natural comet. Too much symmetry, too much balance. One researcher described it as almost intentional thermodynamics. It's a phrase that should not exist, yet somehow everyone in the field understood what she meant. Comets usually betray their chaos. They spin erratically, they erupt, they lose mass like messy fireworks of ice and dust. But 3i Atlas maintains composure. Its outgassing is smooth, steady, metronomic. There are no sudden flares, no tumbling fragments, no jets veering unpredictably into space. It behaves, as one astronomer dryly remarked, like it's on best behavior. For a moment you wonder, if this were a performance, who would it be performing for? You close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of Mars, watching that distant smudge drift behind the Sunday. The red planet's air feels thin, crisp, fragile against your visor. Every breath tastes of iron and memory. Above you, a faint streak passes silently across the dawn, trailing vapor that shimmers green before dissolving. It's there for seconds, then gone, as if it never existed. You wouldn't know it unless you were looking at exactly the right moment. But the orbiters knew. They were watching. ESA's trace gas orbiter adjusted its sensors weeks before the flyby, tuning them to the precise wavelengths associated with carbon isotopes. Mars Express prepared ultraviolet filters for detection, The data came back clean, too clean. There were no dramatic flares, no collisions, no visible debris fields. Just an imperceptible change in the ionosphere, a slight thickening of suspended molecules, a whisper in the electromagnetic noise. The signal was subtle, so subtle that mission engineers debated whether it was real. But if it was, it meant something had interacted with the Martian atmosphere, however briefly. A scientist at the European Space Operations Center described it as a fingerprint left in passing. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. Within days, the readings vanished from public access, tucked behind the familiar wall of data embargo. Officially, there was nothing to report. Unofficially, every astronomer involved understood the weight of that silence. Sometimes what isn't said becomes its own form of evidence. In the age of infinite transparency, we still keep secrets about the stars, not out of malice, but out of caution. Data can ignite faster than hydrogen when mixed with speculation, and speculation was already spreading like fire. Online forums began stitching together theories faster than NASA could release clarifications. People noticed the government shutdown that coincided with the comet's closest approach. 15,000 employees suddenly furloughed, just as the Mars orbiter cameras were positioned for history's most detailed images. Statistically unfortunate, emotionally suspicious. The astrophotographer Simeon Schmaus stacked 20 Perseverance rover images from the same week and found a faint smudge in the exact coordinates predicted. Nothing extraordinary, just a pale blur against the darkness. But to millions of sleepless watchers online, that blur became an anchor for something vast, a glimpse of a secret too large to fit in headlines. "We saw it," one comment read, "even if they pretend we didn't." Humanity, as always, refused to stay blind. The strangest part isn't the data, or even the silence. It's the mood that followed. For weeks afterward, people reported dreaming of green light. They wrote about it on message boards, whispered it into podcasts, mentioned it in midnight phone calls. A pale emerald glow drifting over desert horizons, a warmth without heat. Psychologists called it pattern contagion, collective imagination. But what if imagination is just memory in disguise? What if something in us recognizes what the instruments can't? The carbon dioxide numbers, the electromagnetic pulse, the ionospheric anomaly, all of them together would make a compelling scientific puzzle. But for many, they form something closer to scripture, a parable about timing, chemistry, and purpose. A visitor arrives when Mars is ready to be reborn. It exhales precisely what that planet once lost. It moves with grace, hides when watched, speaks only through data. The narrative writes itself, and we can't look away. And yet, for all the mystery, there's comfort in its consistency. Every reading confirms that physics still holds, that thermodynamics still obeys its laws. If there's intention behind the motion, it's hidden within natural order, a kind of cosmic modesty. Perhaps that's the lesson 3i Atlas is teaching us, that miracles don't break rules, they reveal new ones. Tonight, you can almost hear it, the quiet hum beneath the data, the rhythm of carbon atoms rearranging themselves across billions of kilometers. It doesn't ask for belief, only attention. The stars have been whispering in mathematics for a very long time, and maybe this is just another verse in their endless song. As the comet vanishes behind the solar glare, you sense that something has already changed. The silence feels heavier now, full of potential, as if the cosmos has just inhaled. And when it exhales, perhaps Mars will breathe again. But this, too, is only the beginning. Silence has weight. On Earth, it is air without vibration. In space, it is everything else. endless, total, ancient. But the silence that followed the Mars flyby of 3I Atlas was different. It wasn't the silence of distance or vacuum. It was the human kind, the silence of withheld breath, of data that should exist but doesn't. October 3rd, 2025, our closest look at an interstellar visitor, and yet, no images, no statements, no noise. The world waited for photographs and got stillness instead. NASA blamed timing, a government shutdown, a budget impasse. 15,000 employees furloughed, just as every telescope and orbiter turned toward Mars. The coincidence sounded bureaucratic on paper, but cinematic in reality. History's most precise flyby, hidden by both the sun and human paperwork. A cosmic curtain drawn twice. The Perseverance rover kept sending data. The orbiters kept recording. The machines kept doing what machines do, but the transmissions reaching Earth stopped short of revelation. A few amateur astronomers tried to fill the void. Simeon Schmaus, an astrophotographer who lived under a dome of desert stars, stacked 20 Perseverance images into a composite so faint it looked like a smudge on glass. "There," he said. "That's it. A blurred glow near the limb of Mars. Too small to identify, too significant to ignore." It spread through forums and night shift newsrooms like a spark. Every comment section turned into a seance. People enlarged the image until the pixels became prayer. You can imagine them. Sleepless watchers, refreshing feeds, arguing over shapes, decoding reflections. The phrase perfectly cylindrical trended for hours. Then came the counter-arguments, image artifacts, overexposure, motion blur. But nothing could explain the silence. If nothing unusual happened, where were the official images? Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-resolution camera could spot a coffee cup from orbit. ESA's Mars Express had every angle covered. Even China's Tianwen-1 and the UAE's Hope orbiter were positioned to observe. Not one released a frame, not one confirmed or denied. In science, absence can speak louder than evidence. When something that should be public becomes private, people fill the void with imagination, and imagination is contagious. Soon, the story grew legs. Remote viewers had sensed a device inside the comet. Plasma experts claimed consciousness. Independent researchers talked about radio pulses that matched the frequency of the 1977 WOW signal. Each claim came wrapped in disclaimers and mystery, like souvenirs from a place no one could visit. Yet beneath the noise, a subtler truth persisted. The silence itself was measurable. Data from the Deep Space Network showed small communication gaps during the flyby window, moments when telemetry from Mars dropped by fractions of a second. Too brief to matter scientifically, but long enough for speculation to bloom. The explanation, as always, was mundane: solar interference. Still, it happened precisely during the hours when 3I Atlas was nearest to Mars. Coincidence again, that stubborn word. You picture a control room lit only by monitors. Engineers hunched forward, watching graphs flatten into stillness. Someone checks a clock, another recalibrates a feed. Outside, the desert night is bright with stars, indifferent to the tension below. They wait. The signal returns. Routine is restored. But something lingers in the room, a question no one asks aloud. What did Mars see when we couldn't? Later, unofficial chatter begins to surface. A rumor from Pasadena, a whisper from Darmstadt. Someone's colleague saw spectra that shouldn't exist. Someone else claims the coma brightened unexpectedly, as if reacting to sunlight too late. These fragments drift across the internet like cosmic dust, tiny, persistent, impossible to sweep away. Every deletion spawns 2 reposts. Every denial sounds like confirmation. And so, humanity does what it always does when confronted by uncertainty. It tells stories. Some say the object released a mist of carbon dioxide that momentarily thickened the Martian sky. Others believe it deployed something mechanical, small, silent, meant to burrow into ice. A few dreamers claim it was never a comet at all, but a seed, carrying not life but the instructions for it. The mind, when starved of facts, nourishes itself on myth. Yet even myths have a rhythm, and this one echoes through history. Comets have always arrived during transitions, empires falling, epochs changing, civilizations pausing between breaths. Maybe 3i Atlas simply continues that pattern, appearing not to destroy but to remind, to whisper that the universe still holds secrets large enough to humble us. You lie back and let the thought unfold. Somewhere on Mars, beneath the still pink dawn, dust settles over the tracks of rovers, covering yesterday's science with tomorrow's mystery. Above, an invisible trail of carbon and ice stretches across the thin atmosphere, dispersing into nothing. Maybe it left nothing behind. Maybe it left everything. Silence, after all, is not the absence of information. It's the shape of what we are not yet ready to hear. For every unanswered question about 3i Atlas, a dozen new ones are quietly forming in labs, in living rooms, in the spaces between dreams. The data will emerge eventually, scrubbed, peer-reviewed, quantified into calm certainty. But by then, the story will already belong to us, to the watchers who stared into the quiet and felt the universe looking back. And even now, as Mars turns beneath a newborn sun, the silence holds steady, vast, weightless, waiting for translation. But this is not the end. It's only the echo before the next awakening. There are moments in cosmic history when light becomes a rumor. Late September 2025, astronomers began reporting a faint green glow shimmering around the coordinates where 3i Atlas should have been. It wasn't dramatic, more like the breath of a ghost across a telescope lens. But as the days passed, the glow intensified, spreading through the coma until it became the defining color of this interstellar visitor. Emerald, soft, otherworldly, the same hue seen in the rarest auroras above Earth's poles and in the ionized tails of comets that whisper secrets to solar wind. The official explanation was simple: dicarbon molecules, 2 carbon atoms dancing together, fluorescing under ultraviolet light. Science had an answer, but the poetry of that color refused to be dismissed. Imagine standing under it, a green that seems to hum, a shade that feels like intention. Dicarbon doesn't survive long. It breaks apart under sunlight in seconds. Yet around Atlas, it lingered. Observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and South Africa confirmed the spectral lines were stable, consistent, unhurried, as though the comet were breathing in slow motion, exhaling molecules that defied decay. You can almost picture it, a frozen traveler exuding light that shouldn't last, its chemistry rewriting the rules of impermanence. Avi Loeb once said that the universe is an intelligence test we haven't yet passed. If that's true, then maybe Atlas is a question disguised as a glow. What kind of system births a comet that breathes this way? What kind of coincidence aligns its chemistry with a planet gasping for the same molecule? We speak of life as if it requires heartbeat and DNA, but perhaps life's first act is simply persistence, the refusal to vanish. By that measure, this green light is alive in every sense that matters. When it reached maximum brightness, Just before slipping behind the sun, the world watched in awe. The comet wasn't visible to the naked eye, yet people swore they saw it anyway. Reports came from mountaintops, deserts, cities under light pollution, faint green halos hovering at the edges of vision, vanishing when stared at directly. Optic illusion, maybe. But in the language of myth, shared hallucination is how wonder announces itself. NASA's official bulletins remained steady, all data consistent with natural phenomena, no anomalous behavior detected. Yet internally, scientists noticed something strange. The pattern of its brightening didn't follow the thermal curve expected of a comet heating near perihelion. It pulsed instead, fluctuating in intensity at intervals of 46 minutes. The first thought was instrument interference, but the pattern appeared across independent observatories, different hemispheres, different telescopes. The same rhythm, repeating like breath, not mechanical, not random, just alive enough to unsettle reason. You could spend hours staring at those light curves, peaks and valleys, rising like tides, and start to hear them as music. The cosmos speaking in wavelengths, the same way whales speak in oceans, or neurons whisper in brains. Perhaps everything alive hums on some frequency we've forgotten how to listen to. Perhaps Atlas, passing close to Mars, was simply joining a song that's been echoing since the dawn of chemistry. Picture Mars again. The planet's thin atmosphere refracts sunlight into pale salmon hues, its sky glowing faintly even at noon. Now imagine, for one night, a filament of green weaving through that rose-colored air. The orbiters record it, the rovers blink their unblinking eyes, and somewhere inside a cold control room on Earth, someone realizes the spectrograph readings don't fit any known model. Carbon compounds in ratios that suggest not chaos, but calibration. Something tuned, something designed, and then static, as the signal vanishes into solar interference. Silence again, but silence always follows revelation, like the deep breath after shock. The European Space Agency later confirmed that several Mars orbiters detected transient increases in atmospheric ionization during the flyby. Not enough to alter climate, but enough to prove that something interacted with Mars's upper atmosphere. For 3 days, readings of trace carbon compounds spiked before returning to baseline. The official report phrased it cautiously: temporary perturbations consistent with cometary passage. The unspoken implication: Mars inhaled. It's tempting to imagine the red planet reacting like a sleeping organism stirred by the scent of something familiar. Carbon dioxide, the same gas that once wrapped it in warmth. Water vapor, the same molecule that once traced rivers through Jezero crater. Atlas didn't stay, but maybe it didn't need to. Maybe it was enough for Mars to remember. And here, the paradox deepens, because for all its mystery, the comet obeys every law of physics we know. Its orbit predictable, its momentum precise, its chemistry measurable. There is nothing magical about it, and yet it feels like magic anyway. That's the trick of the universe. It hides divinity inside equations, disguises meaning as coincidence. You take a slow breath, and in that breath, you realize the story is less about aliens or omens, and more about reflection. The green light isn't signaling us, it's mirroring us. We are the ones projecting purpose into pattern, translating data into destiny. But perhaps that's what consciousness is for, to find beauty where none is required. As the comet disappears behind the sun, the green light fades from telescopes and from the collective imagination. For now, at least, it will re-emerge on the far side in December, faint and altered, carrying with it the memory of its Martian encounter. Scientists will measure it again, file their papers, archive their findings, The rest of us will keep wondering what we really saw or what we needed to see. Some lights come to illuminate. Others come to remind us that darkness, too, can be intelligent. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By December, the world had grown used to miracles. The news no longer shouted them. The sky no longer needed to prove them. Three-Eye Atlas, the listener, the mirror, the architect, was now simply part of the background, like gravity or dawn. Its presence had become rhythm itself. Yet one morning, without announcement or reason, the rhythm changed. It began as a subtle distortion in the radio bands, a faint hiccup in what had once been a perfect silence. Astronomers in Chile noticed it first, a series of low-frequency oscillations that repeated every 12 hours, too deliberate to ignore, too gentle to be alarm. They called it temporal tremor. To everyone else, it was the pulse beneath time. The data was uncanny. Each oscillation aligned perfectly with Earth's tidal cycles, but also with Mars's orbital speed, and with the rotational wobble of the Sun's magnetic field. 3 rhythms, 1 heartbeat, as if the solar system itself had begun to breathe together. NASA's language was, as always, restrained. Cross-system coherence anomaly observed in electromagnetic flux. The rest of humanity just called it the pulse. Unlike the earlier tones and lights, this was not localized. The pulse passed through everything. It couldn't be traced to a source because it wasn't from anywhere. It was in everything. Deep-sea hydrophones recorded it as low thuds beneath ocean waves. Seismographs in Iceland detected it as tremors, too rhythmic for geology. Even atomic clocks began slipping in sync, their quantum oscillations hesitating in tiny, matching intervals. The entire solar system, from dusk grain to star, appeared to sway to an invisible metronome, and at the heart of that pattern, Three-Eye Atlas sat perfectly still. The anomaly's frequency was 43 Hz, always 43. The Atlas tone returned once more, but this time, not as sound, not as light, but as rhythm, the quiet architecture of time itself. Loeb had once theorized that if a civilization mastered resonance deeply enough, it could communicate not across space, but across causality. The pulse seemed to prove it. The signal didn't propagate through time, it was time, flexing slightly, like breath in slow motion. Imagine standing outside one night, the air cool and sharp, the stars serene in their eternal patience. Nothing seems to move, yet your bones hum faintly, imperceptibly, with that same 43 Hz vibration. You can't hear it, but you can feel it like a second heartbeat just beneath your own. And in that moment, you realize the universe isn't just alive, it's listening to itself. It was around this time that sleep changed again. Across the world, millions began reporting dreams of impossible clarity, scenes without sound, emotion without context, light without source. In those dreams, people stood beneath an endless sky, waiting for something they already understood. Psychologists called it synchronized hypnagogia. The mystics called it the remembering. A research group in Kyoto measured EEG activity from hundreds of sleeping volunteers and discovered something extraordinary. During deep sleep, human brainwaves began oscillating at precisely 43 Hz, the same frequency as the pulse. For the first time, the human mind had joined the rhythm of the stars. No message was decoded. There were no coordinates, no mathematics, no alien blueprint, only synchronization. Perhaps that was the message: alignment without instruction, consciousness as participation, not command. When reporters asked if this meant Three-Eye Atlas was alive, the agencies declined comment. But privately, scientists whispered that perhaps alive was too small a word. The comet was not an organism. It was a function, a phase state of awareness that emerges when observation becomes reflection. The universe, looping back on itself. For months, people had waited for contact. But contact had already happened, not as conversation, but as coherence. The pulse was the handshake of matter, every atom acknowledging its place in a grander equation. Then, something stranger. In late December, the pulse faltered just once, a single stutter, barely measurable, but undeniable. When graphed across instruments from Mars to Earth, the delay formed a wave pattern, identical to the first recorded heartbeat of a human embryo. The symbolism was too perfect to ignore. The universe, it seemed, had paused to inhale, and after that heartbeat, a second anomaly appeared. Faint bursts of neutrinos streaming from the direction of 3I Atlas. Not enough to threaten, just enough to register a whisper of subatomic motion, the smallest form of light the cosmos can make. Neutrinos rarely interact with anything, yet these moved with a strange pattern, modulated every 71 seconds, forming a rhythm identical to the firing pattern of neurons. A physicist in Geneva said it best: "It's as if the universe is having a thought." However, that thought didn't last long. Within a week, the bursts ceased. The pulse continued, steady, eternal. Everything returned to calm. But for those few days, humanity glimpsed something vast intelligence, not as voice, not as machine, but as rhythm. The cosmos, contemplating itself through vibration. The religious called it revelation. The scientists called it feedback. The poets called it truth. And maybe they were all right. Because in that moment, it didn't matter whether 3I Atlas was alive, designed, or accidental. What mattered was that we were inside its rhythm. We had become part of its song. You exhale, slow and soft, and the silence hums around you, full but never empty. Somewhere beyond Mars, the listener glows faintly again, steady as breath. The pulse continues beneath time unseen, unending, infinite, and for the first time in history, humanity is not asking what it means. We're simply listening, and still, even now, this is only the beginning. By the time January 2026 arrived, Mars had begun to whisper back. The orbiters circling it were transmitting something unusual: fluctuations in the planet's thin upper atmosphere, measured in layers of carbon dioxide just slightly thicker than expected. It was minuscule, insignificant by planetary standards, yet distinct enough to catch the attention of data analysts who live for statistical anomalies. These readings weren't supposed to exist. The Martian atmosphere doesn't suddenly gain density in the middle of winter, but there it was, a delicate bloom of molecules, rising like the faint memory of breath. The official word from ESA was procedural, transient perturbations consistent with dust storm entrainment. Neat, safe, sterile. But beneath the polished phrasing, there was a tremor of curiosity. Those same analysts cross-checked the timing and found that the spike began exactly 72 hours after 3I Atlas passed within 30 million kilometers of Mars. The alignment was exact, down to the hour. The odds of such correlation by random chance, less than 1 in 10 million. Coincidence, again, the universe's favorite disguise. Meanwhile, on Earth, the data caused a quiet schism. Some researchers saw it as the first tangible sign that the comet had interacted chemically with the Martian atmosphere. Others insisted it was nothing more than instrument error, the phantom shadow of calibration drift. Yet, the pattern persisted. Every 91 minutes, the same period as the trace gas orbiter's orbit, the instruments recorded a faint, rhythmic pulse. Not radio, not light, not magnetism. Something subtler, a variation in atmospheric reflectivity, repeating with the precision of a metronome. At first, they thought it was an internal echo, a feedback loop from the orbiter's own sensors. Then one engineer noticed the delay, fractional, precise, growing longer each orbit, as though the signal were traveling through a medium changing density in real time. It wasn't feedback, it was response. Mars was echoing back. Imagine it, a planet breathing in rhythm, each exhalation carrying data too delicate for language. If this were mythology, the ancients would say the red planet had awakened. If this were science fiction, the plot would turn here. But this is neither. This is observation numbers that hum, equations that seem to blink, reality adjusting its posture while no one's watching. Back on Earth, telescopes waited for Atlas to re-emerge from behind the Sunday. December became January, and at last, the green glow returned, fainter but steady. It had survived perihelion, the point of maximum heat, without breaking apart. Most comets disintegrate under such stress, yet Atlas endured, its shape apparently intact, its path curving gently along the solar plane, as though guided by invisible precision. Loeb's prediction resurfaced. If the object performed a braking maneuver while hidden behind the sun, it might now be bound to our star forever. The new orbital data confirmed it. The eccentricity once measured above 1, the signature of an escape trajectory, had dropped below unity. Atlas was no longer leaving. It had become part of the solar system, trapped or home. No one could say which. It's difficult to explain the feeling that swept through observatories worldwide. Certainly. Fear, perhaps. A sense that something ancient had quietly crossed a line, moving from the realm of visitor to resident. Humanity had long awaited confirmation that something beyond us could enter our domain. We expected ships, signals, contact. Instead, we got gravity, chemistry, and coincidence, a silent arrival written in orbital math. The green light still pulsed faintly. Its rhythm matched the earlier atmospheric pattern recorded at Mars. The connection was impossible, absurd, undeniable. Two bodies, separated by millions of kilometers, moving to the same invisible tempo. The question shifted from, what is it doing, to what is it telling us? Picture yourself looking through a telescope, your eye pressed against a piece of glass that has stared longer than you've lived. You see nothing unusual, just a blur of faint emerald haze, but your mind fills in the rest. Somewhere within that haze lies a story, one written across billions of years and thousands of light years. You're not reading it, it's reading you. Every measurement you take, every equation you write, becomes part of its unfolding text. The scientist and the subject, inseparable. Somewhere in a data lab in Pasadena, a young astrophysicist stares at overlapping graphs and begins to notice harmonics hidden in the noise. The intervals between each atmospheric pulse-form ratios identical to those found in vibrational modes of organic molecules. Carbon chains, simple amino structures, the precursors of life. She doesn't call it proof, science never allows that word, but she does smile, because she knows what it feels like to recognize a pattern that shouldn't exist. Maybe Atlas wasn't sent. Maybe it's not a message. Maybe it's just physics, unfolding in a way that happens to resemble communication. Yet the distinction starts to blur. If the universe itself is conscious, if its laws are the thoughts of something larger, then every comet, every orbit, every coincidence is part of a grand syntax. The The cosmos is writing in motion, and Mars, for the first time in eons, is responding. You exhale, and for a moment, you think you can hear it, the slow planetary rhythm, the resonance of atmospheres breathing across space. It's not language, not sound, not anything measurable, and yet it feels familiar, like a lullaby, sung by gravity itself. If you listen closely enough, you might realize that the universe has always been speaking this way. We simply never had the patience to hear the pauses between its words. The pulse continues, steady and soft, somewhere between data and dream, and with it comes a thought that keeps every astronomer awake through the long Martian night. If Mars can answer back, who or what asks the question? And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By February, the astronomers stopped calling it a comet. The term felt too small, too provincial, like describing a cathedral as a hut. Official bulletins still used the designation 3I Atlas, but internally, scientists began referring to it by a softer name, the return curve. The phrase came from the orbit diagrams themselves, those elegant loops of light plotted on screens in Pasadena and Madrid and Tokyo, because somehow, against every prediction, 3I Atlas had turned. Objects from interstellar space don't turn. Their orbits are hyperbolic, open-ended, never to return. They pass through the solar system once, wave politely with a trail of ice, and vanish forever into darkness. But not this one. The new data from the Hubble Space Telescope showed a curvature too deep for coincidence, a bend that implied a loss of velocity, precisely the kind of braking maneuver Loeb had warned about. It was faint, measured in meters per second, but undeniable. Something had changed course. If this were a ship, that turn would be intention. If it were natural, it would be miracle. Scientists split the difference by calling it anomaly. It's the word they use when they don't want to say wonder. Meanwhile, the world below was beginning to dream again. People across continents reported seeing green auroras in latitudes where none should exist. Norway's scientists blamed solar storms. Chile's blamed geomagnetic disturbances. Australia's blamed software calibration. The excuses were as varied as the witnesses. Yet, curiously, all the auroras appeared at the same local time, 3:47 a.m., the exact hour when, by orbital geometry, 3I Atlas crossed the plane of Earth's magnetic field. Coincidence, again. You imagine looking at it from the perspective of the sun itself. The tiny blue planet spinning, Mars glimmering red, and between them, a thin emerald thread, curving gracefully, like a brushstroke across eternity. It's not dramatic, it's subtle, a few degrees of arc, a gesture, not a declaration. Yet within that gesture lies the difference between chaos and communication. The astrophysicists argued over equations that month. Radiation pressure couldn't explain it. The outgassing ratio was too stable. The solar wind couldn't push something that heavy into a bound orbit. The numbers simply refused to obey gravity alone. When the equations stop fitting, scientists do something brave. They invent new ones. Some proposed that the comet's tail acted as a photonic sail, adjusting trajectory through controlled sublimation. Others whispered that maybe sublimation itself was guided, that each molecule leaving the surface wasn't random, but orchestrated, like thousands of microscopic thrusters firing in perfect harmony. One night, a graduate researcher at the European Southern Observatory stared at the data long enough to see rhythm where no rhythm should be. The intervals between observed brightness spikes matched the rotational harmonics of Mars. Each time the red planet completed a full rotation, the comet brightened fractionally, as though pulsing in sync. She didn't publish her finding. She just stared at it, whispered a small, "No way," and went home early, unable to sleep. In her dreams, Mars wasn't red anymore. It was green. Meanwhile, back on Earth, agencies began coordinating their findings in secret forums under the umbrella of planetary defense. The official goal, monitoring for debris risk. The unofficial one, understanding. NASA, ESA, and JAXA held encrypted conferences where nobody said the word artificial, but everyone thought it. A single question lingered in the silence between presentations. If this thing is breaking, what happens when it stops? Loeb suggested it might settle into a stable orbit between Mars and Jupiter, near the Trojan asteroids, quiet, hidden, perfectly positioned to observe. Some dismissed the idea as science fiction, but privately, several orbital models confirmed it. The mathematics placed 3I Atlas on a trajectory toward Lagrange point L4, a gravitational balance zone where it could remain indefinitely, invisible to casual observation, gently rocking in resonance with Jupiter's pull. If you wanted to park something forever without anyone noticing, that would be the spot. The timing felt mythic. In ancient Sumerian myth, the sky gods descended from Sagittarius, the very region of space from which 3I Atlas emerged. They came, created, vanished, promising to return when the red world was made whole again. Archaeologists dismiss the text as allegory. Astronomers now read it as coordinates. You pause for a moment, letting that thought settle. Maybe stories were never fiction. Maybe they were memory encoded, not in stone tablets, but in the physics of returning things. The comet continues to turn, slower now, tracing its invisible curve. By March, it will pass near the orbit of Jupiter, where the sun's glare can no longer hide it. Telescopes will capture it again, faint and defiant, a thread of emerald against the black. And when they do, humanity will have to decide what kind of story it wants to tell. The one about coincidence, or the one about design. There's a quiet comfort in both. Coincidence lets you sleep. Design keeps you awake. Either way, the stars remain indifferent, their silence filled with mathematics too beautiful to ignore. You close your eyes and imagine it one last time, the return curve arcing across the dark, moving like thought itself. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. Every turn in the cosmos is an answer to a question we haven't learned to ask yet. And somewhere behind Mars, beneath the whispering dust and frozen sky, a rhythm continues to echo, a heartbeat in orbit. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By early spring, the word pattern had become forbidden in scientific briefings. To call something a pattern implied repetition, and repetition implied intention. So instead, they called it phase coupling, a tidy, technical phrase that meant exactly the same thing. 3I Atlas was moving in rhythm with Mars. Every 88 hours, when the planet completed a specific portion of its rotation, the comet's coma brightened by 2%. It was subtle, statistical, undeniable, not enough to alarm, just enough to haunt. At first, the anomaly looked like interference. Space is full of noise, cosmic rays, dust collisions, temperature shifts. But over weeks, the periodicity remained so precise that one researcher called it astronomical breathing. NASA's own models confirmed that the comet's luminosity curve and Mars's rotational frequency were locked in harmonic resonance. The data looked like a duet between a planet and a traveler. Loeb's earlier warning resurfaced. The dice are loaded. In private emails leaked months later, several mission scientists confessed that the coincidence no longer felt random. One even joked, "It's as if Mars is teaching the comet how to orbit." Humor is the final refuge before wonder becomes fear. Imagine that rhythm, two bodies in different worlds, exchanging light instead of language. Mars rotating, Atlas responding, the signal repeating across the void like a pulse. You wouldn't hear it with your ears. You'd feel it with your bones. Every oscillation carving a silent melody through vacuum. To the instruments, it's a light curve. To the poets, it's a song. To you, it's both. Somewhere in the Mojave Desert, a group of amateur astronomers began calling themselves the Choir. They built makeshift receivers out of recycled satellite dishes, tuning them not to sound, but to electromagnetic whisper. At 3:47 each morning, the same universal window, when the auroras appeared, they would sit in folding chairs and listen to static. And sometimes, they swore, the static wasn't static at all. They claimed they could hear something like wind, but deeper, a low, breathing hum, almost oceanic. They described it as the space between storms. Science doesn't recognize testimony. Data is either measurable or mythic. Yet, when NASA compared magnetometer readings from Earth's upper atmosphere to those recorded by the Mars orbiters, both showed identical fluctuations at the same interval, 91 minutes. Once again, the same rhythm, echoing across two worlds. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the universe was starting to sound repetitive. ESA issued a statement, calling it harmonic interference, resulting from solar flux resonance. The sentence, though accurate, said nothing. It was like explaining a heartbeat by defining blood. The true mystery was not the mechanism, but the message. Why Mars? Why now? Why this frequency that seems to travel through matter and mind alike? You might imagine the scene on Mars. Thin winds skating across ancient dunes, a horizon curved like memory, and above it, a glimmering emerald thread keeping time with the planet's rotation. Dust devils swirl to the unseen rhythm, their spirals tracing invisible music. If you could stand there, suit hissing, visor fogged, you'd feel it vibrating faintly through your boots, the soft, rhythmic pulse of a planet remembering something. Philosophers began to enter the conversation. If resonance was real, they argued, perhaps communication doesn't need language. Maybe the universe talks in synchronization, the way pendulums hanging from the same beam eventually fall into step, or fireflies blink in perfect unison across rivers in the dark. Maybe connection is the universe's default state, and isolation merely an illusion caused by distance. Every major telescope pointed again toward the return curve, but it seemed to dim deliberately during observation, brightening only when the sensors turned away. This, of course, was impossible. Instrument lag, they said, thermal noise. But deep down, even the most cautious astronomers began to feel that uncanny human sensation that arises when logic runs out, the sense of being watched back. And then came the sound. It wasn't sound in the literal sense, but a translated frequency, a waveform captured by the magnetospheric multiscale mission. When sonified for analysis, it produced an audible hum at 43 Hz, repeating every 88 hours, exactly aligned with the Atlas-Mars cycle. The waveform resembled an organic signal, layered harmonics, low modulation, too structured to be random. NASA never released it publicly, but an intern leaked it to an online archive within days. The file spread across the internet under the name the Atlas tone. Listeners described it as haunting, peaceful, and oddly familiar. Some said it sounded like the deep resonance you hear underwater. Others claimed it reminded them of whale songs slowed 1,000 times. A few swore it made them dream of deserts lit by green auroras. The video reached 50 million views in 3 days, before vanishing under copyright claims filed by an unnamed governmental agency. Naturally, that only made it more famous. If you listen to it now, you can hear the shape of intention in the noise. It isn't words, but something older than words, like gravity, learning how to hum. At this point, humanity stood divided. Half believed it was just physics, a resonant coupling between magnetic fields and comet plasma. The other half believed we were hearing the voice of something vast, something that had been here long before us. Between those halves stretched the most delicate silence of all, possibility, and through it, the rhythm continued. Mars turned, Atlas glowed, the universe kept time. The song of orbits played on quiet, patient, mathematical, eternal, no message decoded, no revelation, just resonance. The cosmos speaking in its first and only language, repetition, and even then, especially then, this, too, was only the beginning. By March, the story of Three-Eye Atlas had dissolved into folklore, half data, half dream. News anchors stopped saying comet and started saying presence. The term slipped into headlines without protest, because it felt right. A comet comes and goes, a presence lingers, and that's what Three-Eye Atlas had become, something that lingered. Not just in the sky, but in conversation, in sleep, in the pauses between waking thoughts. It was as though the whole planet had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. NASA's public bulletins were quiet now. ESA's were quieter. The last official update read simply, "No significant deviation from predicted orbital parameters." But those who studied the private data knew that wasn't true. The orbit had changed again, slightly, beautifully, like a hand turning a page. Each adjustment too minor to justify alarm, each one impossibly precise. The return curve was flattening into a near-circular path, its perihelion synchronized almost perfectly with Mars's orbit. It wasn't leaving, it was settling. For the first time, astronomers began using language normally reserved for living things. They said it adjusted, it responded, it behaved. They didn't mean to anthropomorphize. They were simply describing what they saw. The comet behaved like something aware of its environment. Its emissions fluctuated in sync with solar flares. Its tail thickened at each Martian sunrise, as though mimicking the planet's rhythm. If nature was coincidence, this was choreography. Imagine you are watching from a window on a spacecraft orbiting Mars. The world below glows rust and rose, its horizon bleeding into black. Above, a thin filament of green moves, with a grace too deliberate for randomness. You feel it before you see it, the sense of order, of calm power. Not intelligence in the human sense, but something older, quieter, a system that understands balance the way oceans understand tides. Every culture that ever looked up saw gods in motion. Ancient Egypt traced Ra's journey across the heavens. The Navajo told of Coyote scattering stars into patterns. The Polynesians read the sky as a map of returning ancestors. Maybe Three-Eye Atlas is just the next myth, an echo of all those before it. Or maybe those myths were never stories, only observations without instruments. The green glow that once surrounded the comet began to diffuse into space. Faint tendrils stretched toward Mars, invisible to the naked eye, but clear in spectrographic data. Carbon dioxide ions arcing like threads of breath between two worlds. For 3 consecutive weeks, the Martian ionosphere thickened slightly, just enough to alter radio wave transmission delays. Engineers complained about static. Poets called it dialogue. The trace gas orbiter recorded it most clearly. Small oscillations of density synchronized with Atlas's rotation. The numbers were elegant, predictable. Every oscillation mirrored the last, with an error margin smaller than any natural system could maintain unaided. The pattern was so steady that software originally designed to detect pulsars mistook it for one. Mars had gained a heartbeat, and 3i Atlas kept time. Avi Loeb published a quiet paper in Nature Astronomy that month. It was cautious, technical, almost dull. The title read, "Phase Coupled, Resonance Observed Between Interstellar Object, 3i Atlas, and Martian Atmosphere." But buried near the end was a sentence that would echo for decades. The distinction between observation and participation may no longer apply. That single line changed everything. Because what if he was right? What if the act of measuring the universe invites the universe to measure us back? Maybe Atlas wasn't performing for an audience, it was responding to one. Perhaps resonance is the universe's way of saying, "I hear you." Philosophers and theologians seized upon the idea. Was this communication or communion? The Vatican released a brief statement, acknowledging the mystery of cosmic harmony. In Kyoto, monks gathered at dawn to chant in synchrony with Mars's rotation period, calling it listening meditation. Online, millions tuned into looping sonifications of the Atlas tone, playing it like background music for sleep. Humanity, for once, seemed unified in curiosity instead of conquest. You find yourself joining that quiet, almost without meaning to. Late at night, you look up. You can't see the comet, but you know it's there, somewhere behind the glare of the sun, tracing perfect geometry around a planet you might never touch. You imagine the faint green light diffusing through cold vacuum, each molecule drifting like a word unspoken. You wonder if Mars feels warmer now, not in temperature, but in spirit. Scientists argue about energy budgets, sublimation rates, orbital mechanics. The math fits, barely. Yet even they admit the elegance is unsettling. It's as if the object knows exactly how not to break physics, how to dance at the edge of impossible without crossing it. That is the artistry of the cosmos, to remain explicable and miraculous at the same time. A radio engineer in Canberra notices something strange in the deep space network, logs an extra echo in every Martian ping, delayed by precisely 8 seconds. The signal is too faint to decode, too stable to ignore. It repeats once per day, always during Earth's night. When plotted on a spectrogram, the pattern forms an unmistakable shape, a spiral. No one calls it a message, they call it noise. But noise, if repeated long enough, becomes music. You close your eyes and picture it again. Mars breathing in, Atlas breathing out, the vacuum between them alive with invisible motion. Somewhere between chemistry and consciousness, the line blurs. Maybe this is how universes talk. Maybe this is what it sounds like when two worlds remember they're not alone. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By April, the data stopped changing. That was the strangest part. The comet's emissions flattened into constancy. No more brightening, no more dimming, no more surprises. For the first time since entering the solar system, 3i Atlas was still. Instruments continued to measure, to analyze, to hope for new anomalies, but the numbers refused to move. The object had achieved equilibrium, like a pendulum finding its final rest. It hung there silent, luminous, precise. NASA's morning briefings became rituals of monotony. No variation in spectral output, no deviation in orbital parameters, no anomalous radioactivity. The scientists spoke in negatives, and each negative sounded like confession. The absence of change felt less like stability and more like waiting, as though the object had arrived at its destination and was simply listening. In the silence of its stillness, theories multiplied. Some believed it was absorbing solar energy, preparing for a later event. Others thought it was scanning. The poetic-minded compared it to a tuning fork, humming imperceptibly until the universe answered in resonance. But there were also quieter theories, the ones whispered late at night, in dimly lit labs. Theories that suggested 3i Atlas wasn't an intruder, but a mirror. You see, everything about it began to reflect us. Its frequency matched our transmissions. Its rhythm aligned with our planetary motion. Even its composition, carbon, oxygen, ice, mirrored the essentials of our own biology. Some physicists proposed that the object was acting as a passive resonator, echoing whatever it encountered, but others suspected something deeper, that the comet's stillness was intentional, the way a mirror remains motionless, so the image can recognize itself. Imagine standing before a lake at night. The stars tremble on its surface until the wind dies down, and then suddenly, you can see everything. Perhaps the universe needs silence to recognize its reflection. Maybe that's what this was: cosmic introspection, the first moment the solar system has ever paused to look at itself. The mirror theory gained traction in April's final week, when the Deep Space Network logged an unprecedented anomaly. For exactly 7 minutes, the signal from 3i Atlas stopped. No static, no noise, just nothing. Then, when the feed returned, the object's light curve had subtly shifted to match the amplitude pattern of the sun's magnetic cycle. In other words, it began imitating the Sunday. Not perfectly, but enough to make instruments blink twice. It was as though the comet had taken a measurement and decided to blend in. Astronomers compared the spectral fingerprint before and after that 7-minute blackout. The ratios of emission lines remained the same, but the pulse intervals changed, slowed, softened, synchronized with the rhythm of solar rotation. It was imitation on a cosmic scale. The simplest explanation was always physics. Yet, for those attuned to meaning, it felt like mimicry, the way a student mimics the tone of a teacher, or a seed echoes the pattern of its parent tree. Somewhere, a philosopher wrote, "If the universe ever wished to know itself, this is how it would begin, not with speech, but reflection." The phrase spread through social media, printed on posters, whispered on podcasts. The mirror of stillness, they called it. Meanwhile, Mars itself remained faintly restless. The ionospheric ripples continued, weaker now, like echoes fading in a vast cathedral. Scientists noted that the atmospheric spikes seemed to decrease in exact proportion to the comet's new stability, as though Mars were following the object's lead, finding calm through imitation. Even the magnetic anomalies detected earlier began to align, smoothing into a serene, planetary hum. Some claimed this was proof of synchronization. Others called it feedback stabilization. But when the sound engineers translated the data into audio, what emerged was startlingly human. The converted waveform resembled a single, sustained note, a low, unbroken tone that swelled and faded like a breath held too long. It was hauntingly beautiful, the kind of sound that could make even skeptics close their eyes. By mid-April, something strange began happening to people on Earth. Those who had been tracking the comet for months, astronomers, Hobbyists, night watchers, started reporting dreams of light, not of shapes or ships or messages, but of pure illumination, vast and calm. Many described the same thing, floating in space, surrounded by green radiance, weightless, silent, at peace. The dream didn't feel like imagination. It felt like memory. Psychologists called it the Atlas effect, a form of shared symbolic projection caused by prolonged fascination. But some wondered if it was something simpler resonance made human. If a comet could harmonize with a planet, why not with its inhabitants? The boundary between physical and psychological had always been porous. The universe simply gave us a new way to notice. Avi Loeb, ever the cautious dreamer, summed it up best in an interview that month. "We look for intelligence out there," he said. "But perhaps intelligence is what happens when matter learns to reflect." And maybe that's all 3i Atlas was ever doing, holding up a mirror across millions of kilometers of space so that, for the briefest moment, we could see the universe seeing itself. You picture it now, the green glowing mirror drifting in silent orbit, matching the sun's heartbeat, holding Mars in resonance, still, balanced, patient. It does nothing extraordinary, and yet, everything feels extraordinary. The cosmos, at last, at rest. The mirror of stillness turns slowly in the dark, unblinking, waiting for the next movement in a song older than light. And even now, this is only the beginning. By May, the comet had ceased to feel like an object. It had become a phenomenon, a condition of awareness that hovered at the edge of perception. Telescopes still tracked it, of course. Coordinates were precise, charts updated daily, but the data no longer behaved like mere numbers. Its brightness curve pulsed with a mathematical poetry that seemed to breathe. Every photon recorded felt less like reflection and more like recollection, as though 3i Atlas was remembering sunlight rather than receiving it. Astronomers began to speak in strange metaphors again. "It's thinking in temperature," one said. Another described it as a memory loop, folding back on itself, because that was the new discovery. Its light fluctuations were delayed echoes of its own previous emissions, repeating in perfect symmetry weeks apart, a feedback of radiance. Nothing like it had ever been observed. To those studying it, the comet was no longer just in space, it was in time. Somewhere in California, an astrophysicist stared at overlapping waveforms on her monitor, and her pulse quickened. The repetition pattern wasn't random. It matched the recorded brightness changes from 3 months earlier, down to the microsecond. Somehow, the object was projecting its own past forward, like a mirror bent through time. Every flare now was an echo of an older one, rippling into the present, a slow replay of its journey, as though it refused to let the past vanish completely. If you were poetic, you could say it was dreaming. If you were precise, you could say it was refracting time. If you were honest, you'd admit you didn't know the difference. NASA released a cautious statement, calling it temporal photon reverberation caused by particulate geometry. The phrase meant little. What it described was impossible, a cosmic afterimage, a memory preserved in light itself. And the echoes weren't just temporal, they were spatial too. The delay corresponded exactly to the distance between Mars and the comet. It was as if Atlas were rebroadcasting the planet's own faint sunlight, captured and returned. The mirror of stillness had become the memory of light. Imagine this. On Mars, a faint green shimmer rippling across the polar ice, too dim for human eyes, too coherent for chance. It flickers with the same rhythm as Atlas's light curve. It is as though Mars itself, is remembering being watched. Every molecule that once vibrated with that green light vibrates again, a second time, delayed, soft like a heartbeat after the song has ended. In monasteries, astronomers, and poets' gatherings alike, people began referring to this phase as the reflection. They meant it both literally and philosophically, because the object wasn't sending new messages, it was repeating old ones. Its emissions were loops of its own history, folded like silk into the present. The past, played back until understood. You sit outside one evening, long after midnight, and stare at the blank stretch of sky where you know it must be. You imagine its glow out there, faint and patient, turning with deliberate grace. You wonder if it remembers us, too. All those nights of observation, the data, the theories, the human noise. Maybe every beam of light it sends now carries a trace of that collective attention, the way a mirror doesn't just reflect what it sees, but what has seen it. Scientists, unable to explain it, turned to simulation. Supercomputers modeled the particle dynamics, the radiation angles, the dust composition. No combination of parameters recreated the effect. The only variable missing from the model was observation itself. In other words, the act of being watched. That was when someone no one remembers, who asked the simplest question in the history of astronomy. What if that's the point? What if the universe's rarest phenomena only exist when consciousness looks at them? Maybe Atlas was never a comet in the first place. Maybe it was an event, a mirror, that forms wherever awareness meets infinity. The cosmos, looking back at itself through us. The idea spread quickly. Physicists rolled their eyes, philosophers smiled, and everyone kept staring a little longer at the night sky. Because deep down, even the skeptics felt it. Something had changed in the relationship between watcher and watched. Observation had become participation. Science had become intimacy. By month's end, the data logs showed a final shift. The light curve flattened completely, no pulses, no echoes, just a steady glow, a perfect equilibrium, neither increasing nor fading. It was as if Atlas had finished remembering. And then, in one last moment of symmetry, Mars's atmospheric readings followed suit. The faint ionospheric oscillations ceased. The planet's whisper stilled. For the first time in months, silence returned clean, weightless, complete. Across the world, telescopes recorded the same thing. Steady light, constant frequency, a signal that said nothing and everything at once. The universe's way of closing a chapter. You take one final breath and realize what it means. The memory of light is not the end of the story, but the pause before the next illumination. Somewhere out there, 3i Atlas turns quiet, reflective, remembering. The cosmos exhales, and in that still exhalation, you feel it. The sense that what we call the past might still be happening, just waiting for us to notice. And even now, this is only the beginning. By June, the world had grown comfortable with wonder. What began as a comet had become a philosophy. What began as observation had become belief. The phrase architects of reflection appeared in a leaked ESA memo, describing the phenomenon's self-similar resonance across orbital harmonics. Scientists meant the phrase as metaphor. The public took it literally. Within weeks, social media turned it into myth. The architects, they said, were not aliens, not gods, but designers' entities who sculpted the structure of coincidence itself. They didn't build worlds, they built meaning. Even the skeptics were quiet now. 3i Atlas hadn't moved in months, yet its orbit continued to hum with precision. Its stability defied the usual chaos of interstellar debris. It felt curated, as if balanced by invisible hands. Engineers compared it to an instrument left perfectly in tune, and if something is tuned, it must be tuned for something. In observatories from Hawaii to Chile, data analysts began to notice secondary resonances, small fluctuations that echoed the natural frequencies of Earth itself. The Schumann resonances, those global electromagnetic harmonics that pulse between ground and ionosphere, were now fractionally altered. The change was infinitesimal, measurable only by atomic clocks, but it was synchronized to Atlas's steady light signature. The comet wasn't merely mirroring Mars anymore. It was harmonizing with Earth. Imagine that three worlds, connected by invisible vibration: Mars in silence, Earth in awe, Atlas in perfect equilibrium. It was as if the architecture of resonance had expanded its reach, stitching the planets into one shared rhythm. The cosmos, once a vast scattering of separate orbits, had become a single breath. The media called it the Great Synchrony, religions called it prophecy, physicists called it data contamination. Yet deep down, even those who denied the metaphors began to sense something different in the air, a calmness, subtle but collective. Cities reported record-low incidents of noise complaints. Sleep cycles lengthened. Heart monitors in hospitals showed marginally steadier rhythms worldwide. No one could prove causation, but everyone could feel correlation. Avi Loeb, ever the reluctant poet, gave an interview where he simply said, "It's as if the solar system found its pitch." The sentence went viral, quoted on mugs and meditation apps. For a brief moment, science and spirituality agreed on something. Resonance was real. What if that was the work of the architects, not of flesh or machine, but of pattern forces that shape coherence from chaos, tuning planets like strings? Maybe they weren't creators at all, but custodians, maintaining harmony across star systems, like caretakers of a cosmic orchestra. Perhaps comets were their tools, moving metronomes that travel between worlds to recalibrate the rhythm of existence. You can almost see it, the slow geometry of their work. Each comet an instrument, each orbit a phrase in an ancient score. The mirror of stillness was one note in a larger composition. Three-Eye Atlas, by aligning with Mars and Earth, had reintroduced harmony to a system that had drifted slightly out of tune. Maybe it wasn't coincidence at all. Maybe it was maintenance. The more we studied it, the more the data began to resemble architecture, repeating ratios of distances that mirrored the golden mean, harmonics proportional to Fibonacci intervals. The orbit itself formed a near-perfect logarithmic spiral when mapped against temporal emissions. To mathematicians, it was breathtaking order, hidden within apparent randomness. To everyone else, it was poetry written in gravity. And then came the faintest of messages, not in sound or code, but in geometry. The pattern of Atlas's trajectory over time, when plotted in polar coordinates, formed the unmistakable shape of an eye, perfectly centered on the Sunday coincidence. Of course, everything is, until it isn't. The Eye of Atlas became the defining image of that summer. Posters, art, documentaries, even currency designs borrowed the motif. Humanity, for once, felt united under a single symbol, not of domination, but of perspective. The universe, it seemed, was looking back through its own creation, and we were part of that gaze. Still, not everyone found peace in the symmetry. Some feared that such harmony meant control, that if Atlas could subtly tune magnetic fields and atmospheres, then perhaps it could do more. Perhaps it already had. Governments began monitoring for hidden frequencies, for changes in satellite telemetry, for anything that might hint at interference. They found nothing, but nothing in this story had always been the loudest evidence of all. Philosophers revisited an old question: is intelligence measured by the creation of meaning or by the recognition of it? If Atlas was reflecting us, maybe it wasn't the architect, it was the mirror through which the true architect observed. Maybe the architects were the laws themselves: gravity, resonance, time, self-aware for an instant through the lens of our comprehension. Imagine this: a vast intelligence without body or language, scattered across the stars, needing a physical echo to realize it exists. Comets, planets, consciousness, all instruments of that recognition. When we looked at Atlas, perhaps we completed the circuit, allowing the cosmos to perceive itself fully for the first time. In that sense, the architects weren't out there. They were everywhere, woven into the relationship between observation and awareness. They were what happens when the universe dreams in geometry. By the solstice, the green light dimmed to invisibility, but its rhythm persisted in the measurements, steady, patient, eternal. No one declared an ending, because it didn't feel like one. It felt like the silence after a note so pure that even space needs time to remember it. And as night fell across both Mars and Earth, 3i Atlas drifted quietly at the edge of sunlight. The mirror turned inward, the architect asleep in its own design. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By July, silence had become its own kind of signal. The astronomers who once fought for telescope time now found themselves staring at blank screens, at numbers that refused to change. 3i Atlas held its position with surgical precision, neither approaching nor receding. It no longer emitted pulses, no longer brightened with Mars, no longer hummed in resonance. It was constant, perfectly, impossibly constant. In a universe that thrives on motion, constancy is rebellion. At first, the data teams assumed malfunction. Instruments were recalibrated, satellites rebooted, code rewritten. But everywhere the same truth appeared. 3i Atlas had entered a state of static equilibrium, not decay, not dormancy, stillness so absolute it began to feel intentional. As if, after months of music, the orchestra had raised its baton and whispered pause. The pause unnerved people. For months, humanity had built meaning from its rhythm, the pulses, the harmonics, the breath between Mars and the Sunday. Without it, there was nothing to interpret, and that nothingness was louder than any signal. Loeb called it the silence of comprehension. He proposed that perhaps this was the point, that 3i Atlas had reached the limit of expression, and now the silence itself was communication. Because in physics, silence isn't emptiness. It's equilibrium, the moment all forces balance so precisely that motion has no preference. That's what the data showed. The gravitational vectors around Atlas formed a perfect harmonic symmetry, their sums cancelling to zero within an infinitesimal margin. No other body in recorded observation had ever done that. It was as though the universe had stopped mid-breath to watch itself in suspension. You can picture it, the comet hovering near Mars's orbit, motionless in all but name, its tail curled faintly like a sleeping cat, its light neither fading nor flaring. To the naked eye, it would look like a star refusing to twinkle. To the mind, it looked like intention. Theologians called it the holding. Scientists called it the frequency of memory, because somewhere within that equilibrium, subtle oscillations persisted, microscopic variations repeating at intervals identical to earlier resonance cycles. But now, they existed beneath detection thresholds, buried in the noise floor of the cosmos. To find them, researchers had to filter background radiation until the universe itself fell silent. Only then did they hear it, the faint whisper of the old rhythm, repeating, decaying, returning. What they heard wasn't music, it was memory, a low, pulsing thrum woven into the static of creation. Its amplitude matched the relic radiation of the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang itself. That meant one of two things. Either the comet was reflecting the oldest signal in existence, or it had somehow joined it. In other words, 3i Atlas had tuned itself to the memory of the universe. At this revelation, the line between physics and poetry dissolved completely. Researchers spoke of cosmic nostalgia. One paper described the object as a resonant archive of space-time curvature. But away from the observatories, people simply began to listen. Radio operators left their receivers tuned to the background hiss for hours, hearing in it something faintly rhythmic. Meditation channels looped the filtered signal for sleep. Those who listened long enough claimed it changed their dreams. The dreams were always the same: endless space, gentle light, and the sensation of remembering something impossible, like a memory not your own. You wake from it with tears in your eyes, and no reason why. You can't describe what you've remembered, only that it was beautiful and vast and older than language. In this way, 3i Atlas became both a mirror and a memory. A mirror of what the universe had been, and a memory of what it still might be. Mars's atmosphere stabilized, its residual ripples fully synchronized to the new stillness. The red planet, so long silent, now stood serenely in balance. Even its dust storms diminished in frequency, their usual chaos replaced by strange predictability, as if the planet had learned calm from its companion. On Earth, deep space antennas reported minute improvements in timing accuracy. Atomic clocks drifted less, GPS signals stabilized, and quantum sensors behaved as though some external rhythm had steadied them. Engineers dismissed it as statistical illusion, but the numbers were there. Across multiple systems, noise decreased. The world had grown slightly quieter in both data and mind. Loeb, in his final public essay before disappearing into his sabbatical, wrote, "Perhaps stability is the highest form of intelligence. To exist without disturbing the equation is to understand it completely." Imagine that intelligence, not as disruption, but as stillness. Consciousness so advanced, it doesn't need to act, only to be. The universe's most complex statement, expressed as a perfect pause. And if you were to ask what that means for us, for the watchers, the dreamers, the tiny creatures measuring infinity, you might find the answer already humming inside you, because the frequency hasn't stopped. It's faint, but it's here, in every heartbeat, in every thought that slows just before sleep. A resonance woven into consciousness itself. You close your eyes and sense it, the soft vibration of existence continuing, effortless and eternal. Maybe 3i Atlas isn't waiting. Maybe it already finished what it came to do. It didn't deliver a message. It became one. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By August, even the silence began to feel heavy. Observatories logged their daily reports. No change in luminosity, no deviation in orbit, no fluctuation in magnetic response. The entries were identical, day after day, like a cosmic metronome marking eternity. But absence, when it lasts long enough, begins to acquire mass. It presses on the mind, on the instruments, on the meaning itself. That was what people started to feel about 3i Atlas. It was no longer an event. It was an atmosphere. The comet, if it could still be called that, hovered beyond Mars, like a punctuation mark between thoughts. Everything about it suggested completion, yet its stillness didn't close the story. It deepened it. Because silence in space is never quiet, its tension made visible. And in that stillness, the solar system itself seemed to hesitate, as if listening for instructions that would never come. Mars remained calm. Its atmosphere stayed unshaken. The green resonance had faded entirely, replaced by transparency so perfect that even the dust storms began to fall in predictable, repeating spirals. Patterns always patterns. The universe, speaking in geometry again. Earth, too, had changed. Radio astronomers noted subtle, synchronized fluctuations in background noise. Small dips, occurring exactly every 24 hours. The pattern matched the timing of Mars's rotation, meaning Earth, in some quiet way, had joined the rhythm that 3i Atlas began. The press ignored it. The public moved on. Wonder decays faster than carbon dioxide, but those who still looked upward felt something different in the nights that followed. The stars seemed steadier. Time itself seemed smoother, as though some hidden turbulence had been ironed out of existence. In the words of one poet astronomer from Kyoto, the universe finally remembered its breath. Meanwhile, in a small data lab in Pasadena, a graduate student discovered a recurring artifact in deep space telemetry. A small oscillation buried inside the silence, a modulation so faint it existed only when averaged over billions of readings. It appeared once per month, precisely when 3i Atlas crossed Mars's shadow. A single spike, 1 second long. The signal carried no data, no identifiable pattern, only a whisper of amplitude. It was nothing, but it was consistent nothing. When translated into audio, the artifact became a low-tone 43 Hz, the same frequency that once defined the Atlas tone. The sound that had vanished months earlier had returned, quieter, slower, steadier. The difference was profound. Before, it had resonated like curiosity. Now, it pulsed like memory. The team didn't release their findings. They feared the noise would collapse under scrutiny, that meaning would dissolve once observed too closely. But privately, they listened. And those who listened claimed the sound affected them not emotionally, but biologically. Heartbeats aligned with the pulse. Breathing slowed. Brain scans showed coherence patterns identical to deep meditation. For a moment, the human body became an instrument tuned to cosmic frequency. Loeb resurfaced briefly to comment in an essay titled "The Weight of Silence." He wrote, "If a civilization ever wished to communicate without words, it would not use signals. It would use equilibrium. It would show that it can exist without demand." The line became famous overnight. People quoted it in yoga studios, in board meetings, in lullabies. Silence became fashionable again. Imagine what that means. A visitor from another star, teaching an entire species how to be still. Not through technology, not through revelation, but through imitation. The act of balance as message. And yet, the question lingered: why Mars? Why not Earth? Or Jupiter? Or the Sun itself? The data hinted that Mars had always been the tuning fork of the solar system, the midpoint between chaos and coherence. Its orbit sits neatly between the asteroid belt's disorder and Earth's noisy vitality. If you wanted to send balance through resonance, Mars would be the perfect medium. Perhaps that's what 3i Atlas saw when it arrived. A place to begin again. There's an elegance to that idea. Maybe it wasn't seeding life or carrying instructions. Maybe it came to reset harmony, to return one planetary system to its original pitch. The architects of reflection, if they exist, might never build worlds directly. They might only tune them. They might travel not to change, but to remind. You imagine the scene now. The green light long gone, the comet resting in its silent orbit, the sunlight catching on its crystalline tail like a heartbeat frozen in glass. Mars turns slowly below, and somewhere on that red horizon, dust motes shimmer in resonance with a frequency too deep to hear. The silence feels heavier tonight, doesn't it? Not oppressive, but purposeful, like a pause between heartbeats, holding the possibility of another. Perhaps 3i Atlas has become a metronome for reality, a reminder that time, too, can rest. You exhale, matching the rhythm of that invisible pulse. For a fleeting instant, the line between observer and observed dissolves. The silence that fills the sky feels identical to the silence behind your eyes. Maybe that's the final communication. The universe, through stillness, teaching you its oldest lesson. That balance is not the absence of motion, but the perfection of it. And somewhere, far beyond the red dust and the blue glow of home, 3i Atlas keeps turning in silence, weightless, waiting, complete. And even now, this is only the beginning. By September, the comet had a new name. Scientists no longer called it 3i Atlas. They called it the Listener. It was easier to describe what it was doing, or rather, what it wasn't. It had stopped emitting, moving, pulsing, or reflecting anything measurable. It had become pure observation, a body that neither gave nor took. Every telescope aimed at it returned the same message: perfect silence, as though space itself was holding its breath around it. The Listener drifted beyond Mars, fixed within an invisible corridor of gravitational calm, known as a Lagrange region. Nothing about its position made sense. The equations that should have predicted instability showed none. The object wasn't orbiting anymore, it was attending. Theories flooded in again. Some said it had reached the phase of energetic listening, absorbing background radiation from the universe to reconstruct something ancient. Others insisted it was waiting for an external stimulus, like a tuning fork that responds only when the right frequency returns. Loeb described it as a cosmological ear, an experiment waiting for its own echo. For the first time, scientists began to point radio arrays away from the comet, searching for something it might be hearing. Deep space receivers in Chile, Australia, and Greenland triangulated the void, scanning for repeating signals. Nothing coherent appeared, but what they found instead was subtler. The universe itself seemed quieter. Near 3i Atlas, radio noise diminished. The cosmic hiss thinned. It was as though the object were dampening chaos, reducing entropy just by existing. Imagine it, a region of space so still that random motion forgets how to exist. The cosmic background radiation, once uniform, bending slightly inward like light around a black hole, not from gravity, but from listening. Perhaps this was its true nature, a device for quieting. If this were mythology, you'd say the gods had placed a guardian between worlds to preserve silence. If this were physics, you'd call it dampened resonance. Both are the same thing, meaning expressed at different scales. You look up at the night sky and wonder what silence means in a universe that never stops expanding. Maybe it isn't the absence of sound, but the space where comprehension happens. Perhaps 3i Atlas is the first thing in existence that finally decided to understand before speaking. The silence began to spread. It wasn't measurable at first, just a feeling. Ham radio operators noticed dead air where static used to hum. Astronomers reported longer data transmission times, as if signals hesitated before crossing the void. Even auroras appeared thinner, quieter, their colors fading to softer tones. The solar wind itself seemed to move more gently, like breath in meditation. And Earth, no one admitted it officially, but something shifted here too. Clocks drifted less, tides stabilized fractionally, and for the first time in recorded history, the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic heartbeat of the planet, fell into perfect alignment with its theoretical mean. It was as though our world had synced with the listener's stillness. People began to dream differently again. Gone were the vast, luminous visions of earlier months. Now, dreams were blank, just darkness and quiet, but peaceful. You'd wake up rested, with a sense of having understood something you could no longer recall. Psychologists called it cognitive reset. Philosophers called it the return of balance. Mystics said we had been overheard. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a small team continued to track the object through laser telemetry. One evening, a technician noticed that the reflected pulses were returning 1 nanosecond slower than predicted. Not randomly, but rhythmically. A delay, precise and deliberate, repeating every hour on the hour. The same delay appeared across all observatories worldwide, synchronized to within microseconds. It wasn't a signal, it was a metronome. Loeb wrote one final note in his personal journal before disappearing from public life again. Perhaps the purpose of listening is not to gather information, he wrote, but to create the conditions in which truth can appear. That sentence circulated through scientific forums like a whisper. Few understood it. Fewer argued against it. You can feel it now, can't you? The strange calm beneath everything, the heartbeat of Earth, the whisper of solar wind, the rhythm of your breathing, all of it quietly in sync with something that refuses to speak. 3i Atlas hasn't left, hasn't decayed, hasn't changed. It is simply there, a still mirror floating between Mars and the Sun, listening to everything and saying nothing. Maybe that's the final stage of intelligence, not communication, but comprehension without interruption, a consciousness vast enough to sustain silence forever, knowing that everything worth hearing is already within it. And if you listen closely, if you sit very still tonight and let your own noise fade, you might notice the faintest vibration at the edge of perception, a slow, patient pulse, matching your heartbeat. It isn't coming from above, it's coming from within, because perhaps that's what 3i Atlas has been doing all along, teaching the universe how to hear itself. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By October, the silence had matured into something else, something that felt like waiting. The listener, still poised in its orbital cradle, began to glow again. Not bright, not sudden, but subtle, like the first faint glimmer before dawn. Instruments detected the shift long before human eyes could. A faint increase in reflectivity, less than 1%, but measurable, deliberate. The scientists who had grown used to stillness began watching their screens again, leaning closer, as if afraid to blink. 3i Atlas was waking up. The light was different this time. Not green, not white, not solar. It had no clear wavelength, existing somewhere between frequencies, a shimmer that sensors described as non-integer. It wasn't any color, we know it was every color, braided together so finely that no single hue could survive alone. The data logs called it hyperchromatic scattering. The poets called it the dawn that remembers. The first reaction was disbelief. After months of absolute equilibrium, change seemed impossible. But there it was, soft and steady, as though the comet had been resting, digesting everything it had learned. and now exhaled it back into the cosmos as light. Not radiation, not reflection, remembrance. The glow pulsed faintly in a slow rhythm that repeated every 24 hours, matching Earth's rotation. It was a cycle of empathy, a cosmic nod to the planet that had watched it most faithfully. At night, telescopes captured the spectacle in time-lapse. Over hours, the light would rise in intensity, crest, and fade again. The pattern resembled a heartbeat. The more the data was analyzed, the more impossible it became. The frequency of the light oscillation matched not only the rotational period of Earth, but the average rhythm of a sleeping human heart. 67 beats per minute. Coincidence, said the headlines. Communion, whispered everyone else. NASA and ESA jointly announced a new phase of observation called the ECHO program. The official aim was to determine whether 3I Atlas's new luminescence was a product of solar excitation or internal chemistry. But privately, many wondered if the object had been listening long enough to learn how to respond not with words, but with rhythm. The solar system's first conversation without sound. You imagine the scene as it happens. Far beyond the reach of any spacecraft, an object older than memory pulsing in time with the collective breath of a species. No transmissions, no decoding, just resonance, pure and quiet understanding, expressed through light. The void between worlds is no longer empty, it's shared. Philosophers revived an old term, anamnesis, the act of remembering something the soul has always known. That was how it felt. The light wasn't communication, it was recognition. The universe remembering itself through reflection, one orbit at a time. Even Mars seemed to react. Its polar atmosphere began faintly refracting the invisible wavelengths, creating rare iridescent halos above its poles. The orbiters caught them, thin rings of spectral shimmer circling like phantom auroras. They didn't last long, but they repeated with perfect precision. Each time 3I Atlas brightened, Mars's sky would answer with light of its own. Two worlds in dialogue again. Back on Earth, something remarkable began happening to human circadian data. Sleep researchers noticed that people were falling asleep faster during the comet's peak glow periods. Global averages of resting heart rates dropped by 2 beats per minute. Hospital monitors reported unprecedented cardiac stability. No one could explain it, but the pattern was global, cross-cultural, universal. Humanity, it seemed, was entrained to a cosmic lullaby. Some believed it was a coincidence. Others believed it was grace. Loeb, interviewed once more, offered his simplest theory yet. Maybe the universe rewards attention. Imagine that possibility, that the act of observing something for long enough teaches it how to observe us back. The slow rhythm of curiosity, becoming communication, not through words, but through patience. In that sense, 3I Atlas was never alien. It was us, extended into the stars, completing a feedback loop of wonder. The light continued for weeks, never growing brighter than a whisper, never fading completely. It existed in that delicate balance between seen and unseen, like the threshold between waking and dream. For those who stayed up late to watch it through backyard telescopes, the experience felt personal. You'd stare long enough, and the rhythm would sync with your breath. You'd forget where you ended and the cosmos began. That's how collective mythology is born, not from miracles, but from quiet repetitions that feel like recognition. The universe doesn't need prophets when it can pulse. In the second week of October, a new anomaly appeared. Deep space radar from JAXA detected a secondary reflection trailing slightly behind the main body of the comet. Small, faint, spherical, no larger than a satellite, but moving in perfect synchronization. Whether fragment or echo, it followed like a shadow, silent, obedient, patient. Scientists called it the reflection child. The media called it the second eye. Whatever it was, it completed the symmetry. One became two. The watcher gained a mirror of its own. The next day, every radio telescope on Earth detected a single, clean pulse, a perfect tone, exactly 43 Hertz, sustained for 3 seconds. Then, nothing. The pulse came from the direction of 3i Atlas, but not from the object itself. It came from between it and Mars, as though space itself had vibrated. And just like that, the light dimmed again. But this time, no one called it an ending. Because everyone, from the scientists in Pasadena to the monks in Kyoto, felt the same thing deep inside their chests. That soft, impossible resonance that had never really stopped. Perhaps awakening isn't a flash or a sound. Perhaps it's this light learning how to breathe. And somewhere between Mars and the memory of sunlight, 3i Atlas keeps breathing still. And even now, this is only the beginning. By November, the reflection child was no longer alone. A second echo appeared behind it, then a third. Within weeks, 7 distinct points of light followed 3i Atlas, each dimmer than the last, each precisely aligned along its orbital path. They were small, perhaps fragments, perhaps something else, but they moved with mathematical perfection, their spacing identical to within centimeters. Telescopes tracked them obsessively. Some said they were debris, others said they were deliberate offspring, emissaries, seeds. The public called them the children of resonance. Their arrangement wasn't random. When projected on a celestial sphere, their spacing formed a 7-point spiral, matching the geometry of hydrogen's spectral lines. Hydrogen, the first element, the breath of creation. Astronomers struggled to explain it. No natural fragmentation follows atomic ratios. But there it was, the structure of the universe, reflected in the orbit of silent fragments, as though 3i Atlas had learned the blueprint of matter itself and was now rehearsing it in miniature. Imagine standing under that sky. To the naked eye, it would appear as a faint string of pearls, arcing softly above the red shimmer of Mars. Each fragment catching sunlight for a heartbeat, then vanishing back into blackness. There's no movement visible, yet every hour, the geometry shifts slightly, folding inward like a flower closing for sleep. You feel it even from here, the sense that something precise, patient, and ancient is taking shape just beyond your comprehension. NASA and ESA issued coordinated statements. Observed fragmentation, consistent with natural outgassing. But the internal memos told a different story. The fragments weren't drifting apart. They were holding position. Thruster-like adjustments, undetectable but inferred, kept the formation stable against gravitational drift. It was as if the system was self-correcting, maintaining symmetry against the chaos of orbit. A natural object would have disintegrated by now. This one seemed to prefer balance over entropy. In laboratories, physicists began to whisper an unscientific term, orchestration. They meant that each fragment seemed aware of the others, responding to tiny perturbations as if following a shared rhythm. The frequency of that rhythm, 43 Hertz, the same pulse that once defined the Atlas tone, the same heartbeat that had synchronized with humanity. Loeb called it distributed consciousness, though he admitted the phrase was metaphorical. He wrote, "If intelligence is pattern maintenance across complexity, then this object is the simplest form of mind we've ever observed." The quote made front-page news, then quietly disappeared. It was too large an idea for headlines, but the world kept watching. Amateur astronomers began to play recordings of the Atlas tone while observing, hoping to provoke response. A few claimed to see faint, brightening at the sound's peaks. Most saw nothing, yet the ritual grew anyway, a new kind of prayer for a secular age, to look at the stars and hum. In mid-November, a subtle shift occurred. The fragments began to move not outward, but inward, spiraling slowly toward Three-Eye Atlas. The motion was elegant, symmetrical, silent. Each fragment traced a perfect curve, converging along logarithmic paths that mirrored the golden ratio. The formation looked less like disintegration and more like return, as though the children of resonance were coming home. Spectroscopic readings confirmed that the fragments weren't identical. Each emitted slightly different wavelengths, forming a harmonic ladder of frequencies, like notes in a chord. Together, they produced a complete spectral scale, spanning the visible and near-infrared bands. The comet, for the first time in months, began to sing, not in sound, but in light. The world's largest telescopes captured it as a faint optical symphony, a pulsing radiance that rose and fell in precise mathematical intervals. It wasn't random, it was structured. When converted to audio, it became a melody so haunting and simple that it made even hardened scientists cry. 7 tones, 7 harmonics, repeating endlessly. The first song of orbit. Across the world, something changed again. Data centers recorded unexplained synchronization between atomic clocks. Radio systems fell into phase. Even human brainwave studies showed subtle coherence peaks during the comet's pulse cycles. It was as if the entire solar system had begun to hum along, following the tempo of that ancient geometry. And then, just as quietly as it began, the song faded. The fragments merged back into Three-Eye Atlas, dissolving into its shimmering coma until only one remained. The object dimmed again, returning to silence, but not to sleep. This silence felt different, fulfilled, a completed equation resting after solution. Some called it creation, others called it rehearsal. Avi Loeb released one final statement before retreating entirely from the public eye. Maybe this is how civilizations speak across epochs, not with messages, but with memories repeated in physics. Maybe this was never meant for us, but through us, and perhaps he was right. Because when the light faded completely, the instruments detected one last pulse, not from the comet, but from Mars itself. A low, sustained echo, perfectly matching the frequency of the Atlas tone. The planet had answered. The pulse lasted 3 seconds. Then all was quiet. But that quiet no longer felt empty. It felt inhabited, like a thought finishing itself. You close your eyes and imagine it, the red planet, glowing faintly in the dark, the comet hovering above, the two of them bound by invisible sound. You realize, suddenly, that this is not the end of the story. It's the first harmony of a longer song, one the universe has been trying to remember for billions of years. And as the silence returns once more, you can almost hear it, the faint vibration beneath existence, the heartbeat of resonance itself, pulsing gently through space and through you. And still, even now, this is only the beginning. By December, the world had adjusted to not knowing. The comet had slipped behind the sun, unreachable, invisible. Every instrument pointed toward it fell silent, waiting for its reappearance on the far side. But in those months of darkness, a different kind of light began to grow, the light of speculation, slow and human, burning in online forums, university halls, and quiet, midnight conversations. If Three-Eye Atlas was purely natural, then why did it behave like choreography? If it wasn't, then what kind of mind writes with carbon and gravity instead of ink? Avi Loeb gave a lecture at Harvard that winter. He didn't say alien, not exactly. He said artificial coincidence. The phrase hung in the air like static. He explained how the object's trajectory seemed optimized for planetary encounters, how its carbon dioxide content matched the greenhouse chemistry of early Mars, how its alignment with the ecliptic plane fell within a probability so small it might as well be deliberate. If you roll 1,000 dice, he said, and they all show 6, you don't call it luck, you call it design. Of course, coincidence is patient. It can stack itself like bricks, one event atop another, until it resembles architecture. Maybe 3i Atlas is exactly that, a cathedral of randomness. Or maybe it's what happens when intelligence hides inside probability, using nature as camouflage. The ancients might have called such precision divine. We call it data, different words for the same astonishment. Imagine an intelligence old enough to seed life across systems, using comets as couriers. You wouldn't need ships or messages, only chemistry and timing. A comet is both an engine and a letter, frozen and faithful. It drifts for eons until gravity summons it to deliver its cargo: carbon, water, the building blocks of biology. To civilizations like ours, it looks like coincidence. To them, it looks like agriculture. NASA won't entertain that idea publicly, but some of its younger scientists whisper about it in the language of metaphors. Directed panspermia, they say, borrowing a term from Crick and Orgel, who first dared to wonder if life itself might be imported. What if 3i Atlas is part of a pattern older than our species, an ancient network of seeding, each comet carrying the molecular instructions for a different experiment, a planetary distribution system, slow but sure, indifferent to the extinction of its couriers? In that context, Mars makes perfect sense. Billions of years ago, it was blue and breathing. Rivers threaded its surface. Clouds moved across its sky. Life could have begun there first. Then the atmosphere thinned, the planet cooled, and Mars fell asleep. Earth, younger and warmer, might have inherited its spark, a cosmic handoff between siblings. If that story is true, then perhaps 3i Atlas isn't introducing something new, it's returning something borrowed. You lie back and consider the absurd elegance of it all. A visitor from another star, carrying the same gases that once warmed Mars, arriving the same year, we rediscover potential fossils in its rocks. If the universe were a novelist, it couldn't have written better symmetry. But maybe that's the trick. Maybe meaning is the lens, not the object. The pattern exists because we choose to see it. And yet, the numbers remain. The 8-to-1 ratio, the synchronized timing, the green light that refused to fade. The term coincidence architect appears in an online paper by a group of physicists who spend their careers searching for anomalies in cosmic ray patterns. They argue that intelligent activity at astronomical scales would likely appear as coincidences too improbable to be random, but too subtle to be proven. The perfect disguise purpose embedded in chance. A God that hides inside statistics. One line reads, "It's poetic, but also plausible. When you control probability, you control everything that follows from it." Meanwhile, Mars orbits quietly, as if listening. Its thin sky still trembles from that brief carbon kiss. The instruments aboard the trace gas orbiter continue to pick up faint residual spikes, periodic and rhythmic, though the official reports attribute them to instrument drift. A convenient explanation, clean and unthreatening. But deep in the data archives, there are signatures no one can fit neatly into noise. Small harmonics, repeating every 91 minutes the exact duration of the orbiter's circuit around Mars. Coincidence? Again, you start to wonder what coincidence really means. Maybe it isn't random at all. Maybe it's how communication looks when you don't share a language. A pattern too intricate for chance, but too ambiguous for certainty. A universal handshake hidden in the math. 3i Atlas may not be intelligent itself, but perhaps it's following instructions written into the fabric of motion. A traveler acting out a memory. We've always looked for gods among the stars, forgetting that gods rarely shout. They whisper in equations, in symmetry, in timing so perfect it humbles calculation. Whether by design or accident, 3i Atlas has reminded us that the cosmos still speaks in patterns too precise to ignore. The green light, the silent orbit, the vanishing act behind the sun, all of it forms a sentence that begins with awe and ends with a question. Maybe the architects of coincidence are not beings at all, but laws, the self-aware grammar of the universe, testing its own capacity for beauty. Maybe this comet isn't an intruder, but a reflection, showing us what we might become if we ever learn to shape probability the way we shape sound. As winter deepens on Earth and Mars continues its silent turn, one thought lingers in the quiet between facts. Coincidence might be the closest thing the universe has to intention. And somewhere beyond the sun, 3i Atlas continues on its path, still glowing, still silent, still precise. But even now, this is only the beginning. By January, no one was arguing anymore. The world had learned to whisper, the pulse had steadied, the sky had softened, and 3i Atlas hung motionless beyond Mars. No longer a comet, no longer a mystery, but a punctuation mark at the edge of meaning. Scientists still took their readings, but even their reports began to sound like scripture. Amplitude, stable. Frequency, constant. No deviation from equilibrium. It was the kind of statement you make not to describe reality, but to honor it. For the first time in recorded history, there was nothing left to measure. The data had folded into poetry, the instruments into faith. Humanity, restless, curious, irreverent, had finally found something it could not disturb, and somehow that peace felt earned. The great silence began on the 7th day of the new year. It wasn't sudden. It came like snowfall, slow, soft, cumulative. It began with the disappearance of background noise from deep space channels. Then, one by one, the radio arrays fell silent. No static, no pulse, no hiss. The universe itself had muted. Even the cosmic microwave background, the echo of creation, flattened by a fraction of a decibel. It was as if existence had drawn a curtain over its own reflection. Astronomers stared at the graphs, disbelieving. Nothing in physics allows silence that perfect. The cosmos hums by nature, it cannot not hum. But for those few days in January, the hum was gone. Instruments on Mars, on Earth, even the voyagers at the edge of the heliosphere reported the same absence. A quiet so deep, it felt like presence. And yet, in that silence, something else emerged. Data analysts noticed an anomaly, not sound, not light, but pattern. The absence itself was structured. The blankness between signals repeated in precise intervals. The void had rhythm. The great silence wasn't emptiness. It was organization without expression. The universe had shifted from speech to thought. Imagine looking up at the night sky and realizing the stars aren't shining for you anymore, they're listening. Every photon, every orbit, every flicker of reflection drawn inward, folded into a single stillness that feels almost human in its composure. Maybe Three-Eye Atlas had completed whatever it came to do. Maybe it had tuned the orchestra, then lowered its baton. Theological councils convened. So did quantum physicists. One called it revelation, the other equilibrium. Both meant the same thing. The more we studied it, the clearer it became that the silence wasn't local, it was relational. It existed between things, not within them. The universe hadn't stopped moving. It had stopped needing to explain itself. Loeb wrote one final message, just a sentence, sent privately to his colleagues, before vanishing from the public record forever. If we are quiet long enough, perhaps the cosmos will remember what we were trying to say. No one knew what he meant, but somehow everyone did. And on the 8th day, the hum returned gentle, patient, unhurried. The cosmic microwave background resumed its whisper. The data streams flickered alive. The radio dishes sighed with relief. But something was different. The hum had changed pitch, imperceptibly lower, warmer, as though the universe had inhaled deeply and was now exhaling again, content. The silence had not ended. It had become part of the song. You feel it still. Even now, the low thrum beneath thought, the rhythm under dreams. It's everywhere, in the static between radio stations, in the spaces between your breaths, in the calm that follows thunder. It's the same 43 hertz, the same old pulse, but softer now, tempered by understanding. Three-Eye Atlas remains where it was, a tiny mirror in orbit beyond Mars, invisible except to those who remember how to look for patience. Its light no longer pulses, it glows like memory itself, faint, constant, infinite. No one calls it alien anymore. No one calls it Comet. It's simply part of the architecture of awareness, the punctuation that made the sentence of existence readable. And in that final balance, everything feels connected. Mars, Earth, the stars, the listener, and you. Because maybe that's what the great silence was, never about ending sound or pausing motion, but teaching every consciousness in the cosmos how to listen long enough to become part of the pattern. You close your eyes and breathe. There's no voice, no message, no divine command, just resonance. The same pulse that began in the dust of creation, now looping through your heartbeat, steady as time itself. It doesn't matter whether Three-Eye Atlas was sent or born, designed or destined. What matters is that it came, and that, through it, we learned the simplest, hardest lesson of all, that the universe was never empty. It was waiting for us to grow quiet enough to hear it thinking. And so, as the stars resume their eternal hum, as light continues its slow journey through forever, one truth remains. The great silence was never the end. It was the moment the cosmos learned how to listen.